The wagon train had been Eleanor Carter's last hope, after Thomas died of typhoid fever back in Independence. She'd sold everything, the small farmhouse, the chickens, even her mother's china, to buy passage west. The other women on the train whispered about her behind their bonnets, wondering what kind of woman traveled alone to the frontier. But Ellie kept her chin high and her grief locked tight in her chest. Now, as she stumbled through the knee-deep snow, those whispers seemed like a lifetime ago. The attack had come at dawn, just as they'd entered the narrow pass through the Bitterroot Mountains. Gunshots cracked through the morning air like breaking bones. Men shouted, women screamed. The oxen bellowed and scattered. Ellie had grabbed her canvas bag and run into the trees, following the panicked flight of the Hendricks' youngest boy until she lost him in the white blur of falling snow. That was 3 days ago, or maybe 4. Time had become meaningless in this frozen wilderness. Her wool dress, once a respectable brown, hung heavy with ice. The thin leather boots she'd bought in Missouri were never meant for mountain snow. Each step sent needles of cold shooting up her legs. Her fingers had gone numb inside her kid gloves, and she could no longer feel the canvas bag that held her last possessions, a tin type of Thomas, her mother's Bible, and a handful of hardtack biscuits that were now frozen solid. The storm had swallowed the world. Snow fell in thick curtains, erasing the mountains, the trees, even the ground beneath her feet. She moved by instinct alone, always downhill, hoping to find a valley, a stream, anything that might lead to people. But the landscape offered nothing but more snow, more cold, more emptiness. A branch snapped behind her. Ellie spun around, heart hammering. Through the white veil, she caught a glimpse of yellow eyes and gray fur. Wolves. They'd been following her since yesterday, patient as death itself. She'd tried to stay ahead of them, but her strength was failing. Her legs trembled with each step. Black spots danced at the edges of her vision. She pressed on, using low-hanging pine branches to pull herself forward. The trees grew thicker here, their trunks as wide as wagon wheels, ancient giants that had stood since before her grandmother was born. They offered some shelter from the wind, but not enough, never enough. Her foot caught on a buried root. She went down hard, face first into the snow. The cold hit her like a physical blow, stealing what little breath she had left. She tried to push herself up, but her arms wouldn't cooperate. They felt like they belonged to someone else, heavy and useless. Get up, she told herself. Get up or die. But dying seemed easier. The snow was soft beneath her cheek, almost warm compared to the wind. She could close her eyes, just for a moment, rest. Let the cold take her to wherever Thomas had gone. The wolves howled, closer now, with enormous effort. Ellie rolled onto her back. The storm had calmed enough that she could see patches of gray sky between the falling flakes. The trees loomed overhead, their branches heavy with snow. Beautiful, in its way. Not the worst last thing to see. A shadow fell across her vision. Not a wolf, too tall, too broad. A man stood over her, wrapped in furs that made him look more beast than human. She couldn't make out his face beneath the hood, just the glint of dark eyes studying her with the same wariness she'd seen in wild animals. He knelt beside her, and she caught a glimpse of weathered skin, a thick beard streaked with gray. His hand, encased in a deerskin mitten, reached toward her face. She tried to flinch away but couldn't move. Easy, he said, his voice rough from disuse. I ain't gonna hurt you. He scooped her up like she weighed nothing, canvas bag and all. She wanted to protest, to demand he put her down, but her tongue wouldn't work. The world tilted and swayed as he carried her through the snow. She caught glimpses of his profile, a hawkish nose, deep lines around his eyes, a scar that ran from his left ear to his jaw. The storm closed in again, turning everything white. She drifted in and out of consciousness, aware only of movement and the strange warmth of being held. Somewhere in the distance, wolves howled their disappointment. When she woke next, she was no longer cold. Firelight danced on rough wooden walls. She lay on something soft, A bed of pine boughs covered with blankets and furs. The air smelled of wood smoke, leather, and something cooking that made her stomach clench with hunger. She turned her head carefully. The room was small but sturdy, built from logs chinked with mud. Tools hung from pegs on the walls. Axes, traps, lengths of rope. A rifle rested near the door. In one corner sat a simple table and chair. Another corner held supplies, sacks of what might be flour or meal, strips of dried meat hanging from the rafters, clay jars sealed with wax. The man sat by the fire, his back to her. He'd removed his furs, revealing broad shoulders encased in a worn flannel shirt. His hair was dark, streaked with silver, tied back with a leather cord. He stirred something in a pot hanging over the flames. "You're awake." He didn't turn around. "Don't try to sit up yet. You've been out for the better part of a day." Ellie's throat felt like she'd swallowed sand. "Water," she croaked. He rose in one fluid motion, graceful for such a large man. Up close, she could see him better. Mid-40s, maybe, the kind of face carved by wind and weather. His eyes were gray as winter sky, watchful and distant. He filled a tin cup from a bucket and helped her drink, his hands surprisingly gentle. "Name's Calder Briggs," he said. "This is my place. Found you half frozen under a pine tree. Would have been wolf food by nightfall." "Eleanor Carter," she managed. "Ellie, the wagon train. We were attacked." "I know. Saw the smoke 3 days back. By the time I got there, wasn't nothing left but burned wagons and—" He stopped. "You're the only one I found alive." The weight of it hit her all at once. The Hendricks family, with their 5 children, Mrs. Patterson, who'd shared her sourdough starter, old Mr. Crawford, who'd played his fiddle around the campfire each night, all gone. Weren't Indians, if that's what you're thinking. Calder continued. "Just men, the kind that prey on folks trying to make an honest go of it." He returned to the fire, ladling something into a bowl. "You need to eat. Build your strength back up. Storm's fixing to last another week at least. After that, I'll take you down to Fort Benton. They'll help you get sorted." He handed her the bowl, some kind of stew with chunks of meat and wild onions. Her hands shook as she took it. The first spoonful burned her tongue, but she didn't care. It was the best thing she'd ever tasted. As she ate, she studied the cabin more carefully. Everything was handmade but well crafted. The furniture, the tools, even the bowls and spoons. A man who knew how to live alone and liked it that way. But there were odd touches too. A string of beads hanging from a rafter. Patterns painted on a deerskin stretched on the wall. Feathers and bones arranged on a shelf like some kind of shrine. "Thank you," she said when the bowl was empty. "For saving me." He shrugged, uncomfortable with gratitude. Anyone would have done the same, but they both knew that wasn't true. Most men would have kept riding, especially in a storm like this. Most men wouldn't have risked their own safety for a stranger. "Rest now," he said, taking the bowl. "Long way yet to go before you're healed up proper." Ellie wanted to argue, to insist she was fine, but exhaustion pulled at her like an undertow. She settled back into the furs, watching as Calder moved about the cabin with practiced efficiency. There was something both comforting and unsettling about him. A man who'd chosen solitude, who'd built a life in the wilderness away from other people. What kind of past drove someone to such isolation? Outside, the wind howled and snow continued to fall, but inside the cabin, she was warm and safe. For now, that was enough. Tomorrow she could grieve for the dead and worry about the future. Tonight, she would simply be grateful to be alive. As sleep took her, she thought she heard Calder speaking softly by the fire. Not to her, to someone who wasn't there. The words were too low to make out, but there was a tenderness in his voice that hadn't been there before. A name drifted through the air like smoke, Ayoka. Then darkness claimed her, and she dreamed of wolves and snow and a man who talked to ghosts. Ellie woke to the sound of an axe splitting wood. Pale morning light filtered through the cabin's single window. A square of oiled paper that let in light but kept out the cold. For a moment, She couldn't remember where she was. Then it all came rushing back. The attack, the snow, the man who'd carried her from certain death. She sat up carefully, testing her strength. The dizziness from yesterday had faded, though her muscles still ached. Her dress lay folded on a chair, clean and mended where it had torn. She was wearing a man's shirt that fell past her knees, soft flannel that smelled of pine smoke and lye soap. The cabin was empty, but evidence of Calder's morning routine was everywhere. Coffee simmered on the hearth. Fresh biscuits cooled on a tin plate. Her boots stood by the fire, stuffed with dried grass to help them keep their shape as they dried. She rose unsteadily and wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. Through the window, she could see Calder working in the small clearing beside the cabin. He'd stripped to his shirt sleeves despite the cold, swinging the axe in a steady rhythm. Wood chips flew with each strike. There was something almost peaceful about watching him work, the economy of movement that came from years of practice. The cabin itself fascinated her. Every surface held some small detail that revealed the man who lived here. Knife marks on the table where he'd carved. Books, real books, stacked on a shelf. A Bible, what looked like military field manuals, and, surprisingly, a volume of Shakespeare. Sketches tacked to the wall showing the surrounding mountains in different seasons, but it was the Apache items that drew her attention most. The beadwork was finer than anything she'd seen, intricate patterns in blue and white and red. A war shield leaned in one corner, painted with symbols she couldn't read. Moccasins hung from a peg, decorated with porcupine quills. These weren't trade goods or trophies. They were personal items, handled with care. The door opened, bringing a gust of cold air. Calder stamped snow from his boots, arms full of split wood. He glanced at her, then away, as if uncertain how to handle a woman in his space. "Morning," he said gruffly. "How are you feeling?" "Better, thank you." She pulled the blanket tighter. My dress." "Take your time. No rush." He stacked the wood by the hearth with methodical precision. "Storm's not letting up anytime soon." He poured coffee into 2 tin cups, handed her one. Their fingers brushed in the exchange, and he pulled back as if burned. Up close, she noticed things she'd missed before. His hands were scarred, one finger slightly crooked from an old break. A thin white line ran through his left eyebrow. This was a man who'd lived hard. "I should be helping," Ellie said. "I can cook, clean. I won't be a burden." "You're not a burden." He said it simply, like stating the weather. "But if you're set on helping, there's mending needs doing. My eyes ain't what they used to be for close work." He produced a basket of clothing, all requiring patches or new buttons. Ellie seized on the task gratefully. It gave her hands something to do, her mind something to focus on besides the memory of screams and gunshots. They settled into a quiet rhythm. Calder went back outside to finish his wood splitting while Ellie worked by the fire. The familiar motion of a needle through cloth soothed her. This was something she knew, something unchanged by tragedy. When he returned, he set about making a proper breakfast. Venison steaks, pan bread, wild honey. They ate in companionable silence. Ellie noticed he was careful to maintain distance between them, always keeping the table or fire between their bodies. It wasn't hostility, exactly. More like the wariness of a wild animal unused to company. "You've been here a long time," she ventured. 12 years, give or take. Alone? His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Mostly. She wanted to ask about the Apache items, about why a man would choose such isolation, but something in his manner warned her off. Instead, she focused on the immediate present. "The men who attacked us, do you think they're still out there?" "Gone by now. They know the army sends patrols after wagon train raids. They'll be holed up somewhere, waiting for spring to spend their blood money." The casual way he said it chilled her. This was a hard land that made hard people. She thought of Thomas, with his gentle hands and talk of bringing civilization west. He would never have survived here. The day passed quietly. Ellie mended while Calder worked outside, checking trap lines, tending to tasks she couldn't see. When darkness fell, They shared another simple meal. She noticed he had a way of moving silently, placing each foot with deliberation. Even reaching for his coffee cup seemed calculated to make no sound. "You were a soldier," she said. It wasn't a question. He looked at her sharply. "What makes you say that?" She gestured to the field manuals. The way he kept the rifle always within reach, the military precision in everything he did. "My father fought in the Mexican War. You move like he did. Scout for the Army, 5th Cavalry." His voice went flat. "That was a long time ago." After supper, exhaustion hit her like a wave. Calder insisted she take the bed again while he rolled out blankets by the fire. She wanted to protest, but her body betrayed her, demanding rest. She woke sometime in the deepest part of the night. The fire had burned low, casting dancing shadows on the walls. At first, she thought the sound that woke her was wind or wolves. Then she realized it was Calder, caught in some dream. He moved restlessly in his blankets, one arm flung out as if reaching for something. His face, usually so controlled, contorted with an emotion she couldn't name. Grief, maybe, or guilt. Then came the whisper, so soft she almost missed it. "Ayoka." The name hung in the air between them. A woman's name, spoken with such longing it made Ellie's chest tight. She lay still, feigning sleep, as he murmured in what might have been Apache words. His breathing was ragged, pained. After a while, he quieted, sinking back into deeper sleep. But Ellie remained awake, staring at the ceiling. Who was Ayoka? A wife? A lover? The careful way he'd arranged those Apache items suddenly made sense. They weren't just objects. They were memorials. She thought about the distance he kept between them, the way he couldn't quite meet her eyes. Was he comparing her to this other woman, finding her wanting? Or was it simpler than that? A man so locked in the past he couldn't see the present? Morning came gray and cold. If Calder remembered his dreams, he gave no sign. They fell back into the routine of the day before. But now Ellie watched him differently, noting the sadness that lined his face when he thought she wasn't looking. The way his hand sometimes went to a leather pouch at his throat. Some kind of Apache charm, she guessed. She wanted to ask about Ayoka, but didn't know how. It felt like prying into a wound that hadn't healed. Instead, she busied herself with small tasks, trying to make herself useful. She reorganized his meager food supplies, swept the floor with a broom made of bound sage, even attempted to patch a hole in the roof where snow had been getting in. "You don't have to do all this," Calder said, watching her balance precariously on a chair. "I need to—" She didn't explain that staying busy kept her from thinking about the Hendricks children, about Mrs. Patterson's screams. "Besides, you saved my life. Least I can do is fix your roof." Something shifted in his expression. For just a moment, the walls came down and she saw raw pain there. Then it was gone, locked away again. "Let me do that," he said gruffly. "You'll break your neck." As he took over the repair, Ellie studied the cabin again. Now that she knew to look, she saw Ayoka everywhere, in the woman's touch on the decorated items, in the empty spaces where another person's possessions might have been, in the way Calder had built the furniture, a table with 2 chairs. Not one. This had been a home for 2. Once, that night, as they sat by the fire, she gathered her courage. "The Apache things," she said carefully. "They're beautiful. Where did they come from?" His hand stilled on the knife he'd been sharpening. For a long moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. "They were gifts," he said finally. "From someone who mattered." "Ayoka?" The name fell between them like a stone in still water. Calder's face went rigid. His knuckles whitened where he gripped the knife. "You talk in your sleep," Ellie said softly. He stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. Without a word, he grabbed his coat and plunged out into the storm. The door slammed behind him with finality. Ellie sat alone by the fire, wondering if she'd ruined everything with her curiosity. Outside, the wind howled and snow continued to fall, burying the world in white, somewhere out there. Calder struggled with ghosts she couldn't see. She waited, but he didn't return. Eventually, she banked the fire and retreated to bed, pulling the furs up to her chin. The cabin felt impossibly empty without him. Just her and the Apache woman's belongings and the weight of unspoken grief. She was nearly asleep when the door opened. Calder entered quietly, shaking snow from his coat. He moved to his blankets by the fire without acknowledging her. But just before she drifted off, she heard him whisper, "I'm sorry." Whether he spoke to her or to Ayoka, she couldn't tell. The storm raged for 6 days. 6 days of white fury that turned the world into a prison of snow and wind. The drifts climbed halfway up the cabin walls. Ice formed on the inside of the window despite the constant fire. They were trapped as surely as if bars had been placed across the door. At first, the forced proximity was awkward. After her mention of Ayoka, Calder had retreated even further into himself. He spoke only when necessary. Spent long hours staring into the fire or working on unnecessary tasks, sharpening knives that were already razor sharp, mending harnesses for horses he didn't have. But isolation has a way of breaking down walls. By the 3rd day, they'd begun talking again. Small things at first, the weather, the dwindling coffee supply, whether the creek would be frozen solid or still running beneath the ice. "My husband hated coffee," Ellie found herself saying one morning. Said it was the devil's brew, only drank tea, and only with milk and sugar. She smiled at the memory. "I used to sneak cups when he was working in the fields." Calder looked up from the trap he was repairing. He was a farmer. Tried to be. Thomas was better with ledgers than plows. Kept the books for half the county. Her smile faded. "The typhoid took him last spring. Doctor said it was the bad water. Half the town got sick." "I'm sorry." She shrugged, though the gesture cost her. "We do what we must. That's why I joined the wagon train. His sister in Oregon City offered to take me in. Seemed better than staying where everything reminded me of him." They lapsed into silence, but it was more comfortable now. Ellie picked up her sewing while Calder returned to his trap. The wind howled outside, but inside, the fire crackled warmly. On the 4th day, Calder went to check his trap line despite the storm. He returned half-frozen, empty-handed, with a gash on his forearm where he'd slipped on ice-slicked rocks. "Let me see," Ellie demanded, pushing him into a chair. "It's nothing. Nothing doesn't bleed like that." She fetched clean cloth and the bottle of whiskey he kept for medicinal purposes. "Hold still." He tensed as she cleaned the wound but didn't pull away. This close. She could see the fine lines around his eyes, the way his hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck. His skin was warm under her fingers, roughened by weather but clean. "You're good at this," he said as she wrapped the bandage. "I helped the doctor back home sometimes. When the typhoid came." She trailed off, remembering too many faces, too many deaths. "You did what you could. It wasn't enough. Never is." His voice carried the weight of experience. "But we try anyway." Their eyes met and held. Something shifted in the air between them. Electric as the storm outside. Ellie realized she was still holding his arm, her thumb resting against his pulse. She pulled back quickly, heat rising in her cheeks. "There," she said, voice not quite steady. "Try not to tear it open again." That night, she caught him watching her across the fire. When their eyes met, he didn't look away immediately as he usually did. The moment stretched between them, full of possibility and fear. By the 5th day, the cabin felt too small. They bumped into each other reaching for things, hands brushing accidentally. Each touch sent sparks through Ellie that had nothing to do with static from the dry air. She found herself studying the way he moved, the careful grace that made even simple tasks seem like a dance. They were preparing dinner together, her cutting wild onions while he tended the meat, when it happened. She turned to ask him something just as he reached past her for salt. They collided gently, her back against the table, him far too close. Time stopped. She could see the gold flecks in his gray eyes, smell the leather and smoke scent of him. His hand came up as if to steady her, hovering near her waist without quite touching. The air between them crackled with tension. "Ellie," he said, voice rough. She didn't know who moved first. One moment they were frozen. The next his mouth was on hers. The kiss was desperate, hungry. 12 years of loneliness poured into the connection. His hands tangled in her hair, pins scattering. She gripped his shirt, pulling him closer. Reality crashed back. Calder wrenched away, breathing hard. I'm sorry, I can't." He grabbed his coat and plunged out into the storm, leaving Ellie trembling against the table. She pressed fingers to her lips, still feeling the burn of his kiss. Tears came then, for Thomas, for herself, for whatever ghost held Calder so tight he couldn't let go. He stayed gone for hours. She forced herself to eat, to bank the fire, to prepare for bed as if her world hadn't just tilted off its axis. When he finally returned, she pretended to be asleep. She heard him moving quietly in the darkness, settling by the fire. Then, so soft she almost missed it. "Forgive me, Ayoka." The 6th day dawned clear and bitter cold. The storm had finally exhausted itself, leaving a world transformed. Drifts rose higher than a man's head. Trees bent under the weight of snow. The silence after so much wind felt unnatural. They moved around each other carefully, like dancers who'd forgotten the steps. Calder busied himself with digging out the door and checking for damage. Ellie threw herself into cooking and cleaning with desperate energy. It was afternoon when he finally spoke. "We need more firewood. Storm used up most of what I had split. I'll help. You don't need to, please." She met his eyes. "I need the air." They worked side by side in the brilliant cold, her gathering while he split. The physical labor felt good, honest. Sweat soon had her shedding her shawl despite the temperature. "You're not what I expected," Calder said suddenly. She paused, arms full of wood. "What did you expect?" "Don't know. Someone softer, maybe weaker." He gestured at her, working without complaint in the bitter cold. Thomas was a lucky man. "He wouldn't have thought so. I was too independent for his taste, too stubborn." She smiled sadly. "He wanted a proper wife, tea parties and needlework. Got a farm woman who argued about politics and read books meant for men." "Nothing wrong with that. You didn't know Thomas." They continued working in silence until the woodpile was replenished. As they headed back inside, Ellie slipped on hidden ice. Calder caught her automatically, arms strong around her waist. For a moment, they stood pressed together, her hands against his chest. "We can't keep doing this," she whispered. "I know." But neither moved. His hands tightened on her waist. She could feel his heart racing under her palms. The kiss, when it came, was gentler than before, but no less intense. He backed her against the cabin wall, one hand braced beside her head, the other cupping her face with impossible tenderness. "Ellie," he breathed against her lips. "I shouldn't. You don't understand." "Then help me understand." She gripped his coat. "Who was she? What happened?" He pulled back but didn't let go entirely. His forehead rested against hers, eyes closed. "She was everything, and I failed her." "Tell me." For a long moment, she thought he'd pull away again. Then, quietly, "Inside. It's too cold for this story." They stumbled back into the warmth of the cabin. Calder added wood to the fire, movements agitated. Ellie waited, giving him time to find the words. Finally, he sat across from her, hands clasped between his knees. "I was assigned to Fort Benton in '62, green as grass. Thought I knew everything about fighting Indians." His smile was bitter. "First patrol. We got ambushed in a canyon. Took an arrow in the shoulder. Another in the leg. Should have died." He touched his shoulder absently, fingers finding old scars through his shirt. "War party left me for dead. Would have been right. Except a hunting party found me. Apache. They could have finished the job. Instead, they took me to their village. Ayoka was the medicine woman's daughter. She fought to save me, even though her brother had been killed by soldiers the winter before. Said the spirits told her I was different." His voice softened. She was 17, proud as an eagle, beautiful as morning, and kind, so kind it broke something in me. Ellie waited, hardly breathing. I stayed with them through the winter, healing, learning. They taught me to trek, to hunt their way, to see the land as they did, and somewhere in there, I fell in love with her. He met Ellie's eyes. We were married in their way. I threw away everything, my commission, my past, my people, for her. What happened? His face went stone. The army happened. They'd been looking for me. Thought I'd turned traitor. When they found the village, he stood abruptly, pacing. I tried to stop it. Stood between the soldiers and the lodges, begging. They knocked me down, called me Indian lover. By the time I got back up, the shooting had started. Ellie's hands pressed to her mouth. She was trying to get the children to safety. Took a bullet meant for someone else's baby. His voice broke. Died in my arms while the village burned. Last thing she said was my name. The silence stretched between them, heavy with grief. Ellie rose, went to him. He stood rigid as she wrapped her arms around him, but slowly, like ice melting. He bent into her embrace. It wasn't your fault, she whispered. Wasn't it? If I'd never come to them, never made her love me. Stop. She pulled back, forced him to meet her eyes. You can't live like that. Trust me, I know. I've asked myself 1,000 times if I could have saved Thomas. Different water, different town, different choices. It'll eat you alive. Maybe it should. No. She touched his face, feeling the wetness there. She saved you for a reason. Don't waste that gift. He caught her hand, pressed it harder against his cheek. When I look at you, God help me, Ellie. When I look at you, I see her. Not your face, but the way you are. Strong, stubborn, kind even when the world's been cruel. I'm not her, Ellie said softly. I can't be her. I know. His voice was raw. That's what terrifies me. They stood there as the fire crackled and snow began to fall again outside. Two damaged souls in a cabin at the edge of the world, holding on to each other like shipwreck survivors. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was understanding. And for now, that was enough. The confession changed everything and nothing. They still moved around each other carefully, but now the carefulness had a different quality. Less like strangers avoiding contact, more like people afraid of wanting too much. Calder told her the rest over the next few days, parceling out memories like a miser with gold, how he'd been stationed at Fort Benton as part of the 5th Cavalry, young and eager to prove himself against the Indian threat, how that first ambush had shattered his certainty about who the enemy was. The Apache who found me could have taken my scalp, he said one evening, whittling by the fire. Would have been their right. Instead, they carried me 15 miles to their winter camp. Ayoka's grandmother was the one who dug the arrowheads out, old woman with hands like leather and eyes that saw straight through you. He'd spent that winter learning their ways, how to read sign, track game across bare rock, find water in the desert. But mostly, he'd learned that everything he'd been told about the Apache was wrong. They weren't savages, he said, his knife moving in steady strokes. They were people, families. They laughed at the same things we do, worried about their children, told stories around the fire. Ayoka would translate for me, teaching me words. Her brother Eagle Dancer hated it, hated me, but she'd just laugh and say the spirits had plans. Ellie listened, working on a tear in his winter coat. These glimpses into his past were precious, helping her understand the man he'd become. How did it happen between you? A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Slowly, she was proud. Wouldn't give me the time of day at first, but I was patient, kept bringing her little gifts. Flowers, pretty stones. Once a young rabbit I'd saved from a hawk. She'd accept them all formal-like. Then I'd catch her smiling when she thought I wasn't looking. The courtship had taken months. By spring, when he was healed enough to leave, neither wanted him to go. Her grandmother saw it first, told me if I was going to stay, I had to choose proper. Couldn't have one foot in each world. So he'd chosen. Sent word to the fort that he was dead. Burned his uniform. Learned to live as the Apache lived. The ceremony binding them had been simple. An exchange of gifts, words spoken before the elders, her grandmother's blessing. "Were you happy?" Ellie asked softly, like I'd never been before or since. His hand stilled on the wood. 2 years we had, 2 years of everything she was expecting when... He stopped, unable to continue. Ellie set aside her sewing and moved to sit beside him, not touching but close enough that he could feel her presence. The attack. Spring of '64. The army was pushing hard, wanted all the Apache moved to reservations. Some bands were fighting back, raiding settlements. Our group just wanted to be left alone. But that didn't matter. Apache was Apache to them. He told it in flat, emotionless sentences. How he'd been out hunting when he saw the smoke. How he'd ridden back to find the cavalry surrounding the camp. How he'd tried to use his white skin, his knowledge of military protocol, to stop what was coming. Captain Morrison knew me from before. Thought I'd been captured, brainwashed. When I tried to explain, tried to protect them, he had me beaten and tied up, made me watch while they... His voice broke. She was trying to lead the children to safety through the creek. Sergeant put a rifle bullet in her back. She fell in the water. I can still see her hair floating. Ellie took his hand. His fingers were ice cold despite the fire. They burned everything, killed anyone who ran. When it was over, Morrison cut me loose, told me I was lucky he didn't hang me for a traitor, said I should thank him for freeing me from my savage captors. Bitter laughter. I went back after they left. Found her body downstream, buried her in the old way, up in the rocks where she used to go to pray. "The things in your cabin," Ellie said, "they were hers?" All I could salvage, that and memories. He pulled the leather pouch from his shirt, showed her the small objects inside. A blue bead, a hawk feather, a smooth river stone. She made this for me, said it would keep me safe when I was hunting. Guess it worked, after a fashion. They sat in silence while the fire burned low. Finally, Ellie asked the question that had been haunting her. "Why did you save me? After everything, why risk it for a stranger?" He considered for a long moment. Maybe because I couldn't save her. Maybe because leaving you would have been another kind of dying. He met her eyes. Or maybe because when I saw you there in the snow, for just a second, I thought the spirits were giving me another chance. "I'm not her," Ellie said again, gently but firmly. "No, you're you. Eleanor Carter, who argues about books and survived when everyone else died, who mends clothes with tiny, perfect stitches and makes coffee strong enough to float a horseshoe." His thumb brushed across her knuckles. "I know the difference. That's what scares me." The next morning brought brilliant sunshine that made the snow-covered world painful to look at. Calder announced they needed fresh meat. The storm had depleted their supplies. He invited Ellie to come with him, teaching her to walk in snowshoes he'd made years before. At first, she struggled with the awkward gait required, but soon found a rhythm. They moved through a forest transformed, trees bent into fantastic shapes by ice and snow. Calder pointed out tracks, deer, rabbit, the delicate prints of birds. "There," he whispered, pointing to a ridge. A small herd of elk grazed on exposed grass, steam rising from their nostrils in the cold air. He was lining up his shot when Ellie noticed the movement to their left. A mountain cat, drawn by the same prey, crept through the underbrush. Without thinking, she touched Calder's arm in warning. He saw it instantly, smoothly shifting his aim. The shot echoed across the valley. The cat bounded away while the elk scattered. One cow stumbled, fell, lay still. "Good eyes," he said, and the approval in his voice warmed her more than whiskey. They worked together to field dress the elk, Calder teaching her the proper way to preserve the hide and meat. It was bloody work, but Ellie found she didn't mind. There was honesty in it, providing for survival. As they packed the meat for the trek back, she asked, "Did you teach Ayoka to hunt?" "Other way round? She could track a ghost over Bear Rock." He smiled at the memory. "First time I went hunting with her people, I spooked every animal in 5 miles. She laughed so hard she cried, said I moved like a buffalo in a pottery shop." They were almost back to the cabin when Ellie's snowshoe caught on a buried branch. She pitched forward, and Calder caught her, pulling her against him to keep them both from falling. They ended up pressed together, her back to his chest, his arms around her waist. "Steady," he murmured, his breath warm against her ear. She turned in his arms, looking up at him. "Calder, I know." His forehead dropped to rest against hers. "I know this isn't fair to you, asking you to compete with a ghost. I'm not competing." She brought her hand up to touch his face, feeling the roughness of stubble, the warmth of skin. "She was your past. I'm not asking you to forget her. But I'm here now, alive, real." He caught her hand, pressed it harder against his cheek. "Too real. When I touch you, I feel things I thought were dead. Want things I don't deserve. Who decides what we deserve?" Instead of answering, he kissed her. Different from before, slower, deeper, with a tenderness that made her ache. When they finally broke apart, both breathing unsteadily, he kept her close. "Come on," he said roughly, "before we freeze." That night, as they shared the elk meat and wild onions, Ellie felt the shift between them. The kiss had been a claiming of sorts, an acknowledgement that whatever was growing between them couldn't be ignored. Calder seemed lighter somehow, as if speaking Ayoka's story had lifted some invisible weight. He told her more about the good times, festivals where Ayoka would dance until dawn, quiet mornings gathering herbs while she taught him the Apache names for plants, the way she'd hum while working, unconsciously matching the rhythm of her grinding stone. "She would have liked you," he said suddenly. "Would have said you had a strong spirit. That's what she called it when someone survived what should have killed them." Ellie smiled. "I think I would have liked her too." "Any woman who could make you move like a buffalo in a pottery shop must have been something special." He laughed, the first real laugh she'd heard from him. It transformed his face, erasing years of grief. "She was, God help me, she was." Later, as they prepared for sleep, Calder hesitated by his usual spot near the fire. Ellie, already in bed, watched him wage some internal battle. Finally, she spoke. "You could sleep closer. It's cold tonight." He looked at her for a long moment, then gathered his blankets and laid them beside the bed, close enough to touch but still maintaining that last boundary. As she drifted toward sleep, she felt his hand find hers in the darkness. "Thank you," he whispered, "for listening, for understanding." She squeezed his fingers gently. Outside, wolves howled in the distance, but inside the cabin was warm and safe, for the first time since the attack on the wagon train. Ellie felt something that might have been hope. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. The question of what came next, where they went from here, loomed large. But tonight, with Calder's hand in hers and his breathing steady in the darkness, she was content to simply be. The ghosts could rest, at least for a while. The breaking point came on a night when the moon hung full and bright over the snow. They'd spent the day working side by side, smoking elk meat and preparing hides. The domesticity of it, the simple rhythm of shared labor, had worn down the last walls between them. After supper, Calder had pulled out a small wooden flute, carved in the Apache style. "She made this for me," he said, turning it over in his hands. "Haven't played it since." "Play it now," Ellie said softly. He hesitated, then brought it to his lips. The melody that emerged was haunting, full of longing and loss. Ellie closed her eyes, letting the music wash over her. When it ended, tears tracked down her cheeks. That was beautiful. She used to say music could heal anything. He set the flute aside carefully. Maybe she was right. First time I've been able to play it without. He didn't finish, but he didn't need to. Ellie rose from her chair, moved to where he sat by the fire. This time, when she reached for him, he didn't pull away. Their kiss was inevitable as sunrise, deep and desperate and full of need too long denied. "Ellie," he breathed against her mouth, "I don't want to hurt you." "You won't." She framed his face with her hands. I'm not fragile. Calder, I won't break. He studied her face in the firelight, searching for something. Whatever he found there must have satisfied him because he stood, pulling her with him. His hands shook slightly as they found the pins in her hair, letting it tumble free. You're sure? For answer, she began unbuttoning his shirt, her own hands trembling but determined. It had been so long since she'd been touched with desire, since she'd felt beautiful and wanted. Thomas had been gentle but perfunctory in their marriage bed, more concerned with duty than passion. This was different, electric, consuming. Calder's hands were reverent as they helped her with stays and buttons, revealing skin pale as moonlight. He traced the line of her collarbone with one finger, making her shiver. So beautiful, he murmured. God help me, Ellie. They came together with a hunger born of loneliness and loss. Finding solace in each other's arms, he carried her to the bed, laying her down among the furs with infinite care. What followed was a revelation, passion she hadn't known existed, tenderness that made her weep, a connection that went beyond the physical. Afterward, they lay entwined, her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat slowly return to normal. His fingers combed through her hair in lazy strokes. I didn't know, she whispered. I didn't know it could be like that. He pressed a kiss to her forehead. Neither did I. Not for a long time. They drowsed, waking to love again as the fire burned low. This time was slower, deeper, a careful exploration of each other. Ellie traced his scars with the lips and fingers, learning the map of his body. He worshipped her with touches that made her feel cherished, desired, alive. Near dawn, she woke to find him watching her, his expression unreadable in the gray light. Regrets? She asked, suddenly afraid. No. He pulled her closer. Never that. I keep waiting to wake up. Find out this was a dream. I'm real. She pressed his hand to her heart, letting him feel its steady beat. This is real. They rose late, moving around each other with new awareness. Every accidental touch sent sparks through her. When he handed her coffee, their fingers lingered in the exchange. When she passed behind his chair, she couldn't resist touching his shoulder. But with the passion came uncertainty. What were they to each other now? What future could they have? The questions hung unspoken between them as they went about the day's tasks. It was afternoon when Calder finally broke the silence. The snow's melting. Another week, maybe 2, and the pass will be clear enough to travel. Ellie's hands stilled on the hide she was working. Oh. I told you I'd take you to Fort Benton. Help you get sorted. He wasn't looking at her, focused on oiling his rifle with unnecessary concentration. Find passage to Oregon City, if that's still what you want. Is that what you want? What I want doesn't matter. It does to me. He set down the rifle, finally meeting her eyes. What I want is to keep you here forever, build you a proper bed instead of pine boughs, teach you everything Ayoka taught me about living on this land. Wake up every morning knowing you're safe and warm in mine. His voice roughened. But that's not fair to you. You deserve better than a broken-down scout hiding from the world. Ellie abandoned her work, crossing to kneel beside his chair. What if I don't want better? What if I want you? You don't know what you're saying. The isolation, the hardship. I survived a massacre. I walked through a blizzard. I've already faced the worst. She took his hands. Don't I get a say in my own future? Before he could answer, they heard it, horses approaching through the snow. Calder was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand, pushing Ellie behind him. Stay inside, he ordered, moving toward the door. But Ellie had lived through too much to hide now. She grabbed the pistol from his coat, checked the load. Together or not at all. Something flashed in his eyes. Pride, fear, resignation. He nodded once. They emerged to find 3 riders approaching through the trees. Not soldiers. Their clothes were too rough, their horses too varied. Calder relaxed slightly, but kept the rifle ready. That's close enough, he called when they were 20 yards out. The lead rider, a man with greasy hair and a scar across his nose, raised his hands peacefully. Easy, friend. We don't mean no harm. Just looking for shelter. Been tracking through these mountains for days. There's nothing for you here. Town's 2 days south. Scarface's eyes fixed on Ellie, and something cold slithered through his expression. Well now, didn't expect to find a woman up here. You're a lucky man. Friend. I said move on. Now that's not very Christian of you. The rider's hand drifted toward his sidearm. Share and share alike. My mother always said. The other two riders spread out slightly, hands also moving toward weapons. Ellie recognized the tactic. They were getting ready to rush them. I know you, she said suddenly. All three men turned to her. You were with the group that hit our wagon train. I saw you rifling through Mrs. Patterson's things. Scarface's pretense of friendliness dropped. Well, hell, should have made sure you were all dead. He drew his pistol in one smooth motion. Everything happened at once. Calder's rifle cracked, taking Scarface in the shoulder, spinning him from his horse. Ellie fired at the second rider, missing but making his horse rear. The third man got off a shot that splintered wood near Ellie's head before Calder put him down. The second rider, fighting to control his mount, made the mistake of turning his back. Ellie's second shot caught him between the shoulder blades. He toppled into the snow. Sudden silence fell, broken only by the horse's nervous stamping. Scarface writhed on the ground, clutching his shoulder. You bastard, he snarled. You'll hang for this. No witnesses, Calder said coldly. He walked over, kicked the man's gun away. Except the woman you were fixing to assault. Don't think any judge would fault me. There's more of us. They'll come looking. Let them come. Calder's voice was flat, dangerous. Been a long time since I had to kill anyone. Almost forgot how easy it is. Something in his tone must have convinced Scarface, because the fight went out of him. Just let me go. I'll leave. Never come back. Calder looked at Ellie. The decision hung between them, mercy or justice. She thought of the Hendricks children, of Mrs. Patterson's screams. He was there, she said quietly. When they burned the wagons, when they shot anyone who tried to run, that was all Calder needed. The rifle spoke once more, and Scarface moved no more. They dragged the bodies into the trees, well away from the cabin. Come spring, the scavengers would take care of them. The horses they kept, good animals who weren't to blame for their riders' choices. That night, washing blood from her hands, Ellie felt no guilt, only a strange sense of completion, as if the last tie to her old life had been severed. You all right? Calder asked, watching her with concern. Yes, she dried her hands, turned to face him. Is it wrong that I feel free? No, sometimes the only way forward is through blood. He pulled her into his arms. You were brave today, steady. Not many women could have done what you did. I'm not most women. No, he agreed, kissing her forehead. You're not. They made love that night with desperate passion, as if death's proximity had reminded them how fragile life could be. Ellie clung to him, anchoring herself in his solid warmth, the steady beat of his heart, the soft words he murmured against her skin. Later, as they lay spent and intertwined, she made her decision. I don't want to go to Fort Benton, she said into the darkness. I don't want to go to Oregon City. His arms tightened around her. Ellie, I want to stay here, with you, build a life together. She rose up on one elbow, needing to see his face. Unless you don't want that. Want it? He pulled her down for a fierce kiss. I want it more than my next breath, but no buts. She pressed her fingers to his lips. We've both lost enough. Why can't we choose happiness for once? He was quiet for a long moment. Then, it won't be easy. The winters are hard, the summers harder. No neighbors for miles, no church, no store, no society. I'll have you. That's society enough. People will talk. A woman living unwed with a man who went native. Then marry me. The words surprised them both. Ellie flushed but didn't take them back. Not for propriety. For us. So I know this is real. that you're choosing me, not just accepting what fate threw in your path." Calder sat up slowly, his expression stunned. "You'd marry me, after everything I've told you, knowing what I am? I know exactly what you are. A good man who's suffered too much, who deserves a second chance at happiness." She touched his face gently. "We both do." He caught her hand, pressed it to his lips. "Eleanor Carter, you're the strongest, stubbornest, most beautiful woman I've ever known. Besides one." His voice grew serious. "I'll never forget her. Part of me will always love her. Can you live with that?" "We all carry our dead," Ellie said softly. "I'll always love Thomas in my way. But they're gone, and we're here. We can honor them by living, not just surviving." He was quiet so long she feared she'd presumed too much. Then he stood, crossed to the shelf where Alyoka's belongings rested. He took down the beaded necklace, held it in his hands for a moment, then gently placed it around Ellie's neck. "She would want this," he said roughly. "Would want me to be happy, to love again." He met her eyes, his own suspiciously bright. "I'll marry you. Eleanor Carter. Make an honest woman of you, as my mother would say." Ellie touched the necklace, feeling the weight of trust it represented. "When?" "Soon as the pass clears. We'll go to Fort Benton. Find a preacher or a judge." He pulled her into his arms. "Then we'll come back here and build something new, together." They sealed the promise with kisses that tasted of tears and hope. Outside, the wind sang through the pines, but inside the cabin was warmth and love and the promise of tomorrow. Morning came crisp and bright, the kind of day that made the mountains look like God's own cathedral. Ellie woke early, slipping from Calder's arms to start breakfast. She hummed as she worked, feeling lighter than she had in months. The beaded necklace caught the morning light, sending tiny rainbows across the cabin walls. She was so absorbed in her contentment that she didn't notice Calder's restlessness when he woke. He stood by the window, studying the sky with the intensity of a man reading bad news. "Storm coming," he said finally. "Big one, from the look of those clouds." Ellie joined him at the window. The mountains to the north were already obscured by a wall of gray. "How long?" "Few hours, maybe less." "I need to check the trap lines. Bring in more wood." He was already reaching for his coat. "You should stay inside. Keep the fire going. I'll help with the wood at least." He started to protest, then nodded. They'd learned to work as a team. No point in changing that now. They worked quickly, racing the approaching storm. Ellie had become efficient with snowshoes, moving almost as quietly as Calder through the forest. As they gathered deadfall and stacked it against the cabin, she noticed fresh tracks in the snow. "Calder," she pointed to the marks. "Those weren't here yesterday." He knelt, studying them with sudden intensity. "Men, 3, maybe 4, moving careful-like." His face hardened. "Get inside." "But now, Ellie." The urgency in his voice sent her hurrying to the cabin. She'd barely made it through the door when she heard the whistle, a high, sharp sound that didn't belong to any bird. Calder was right behind her, barring the door. "They're out there," he said grimly. "Must be the rest of that gang. Scarface wasn't lying about others." He moved with deadly efficiency, checking weapons, positioning himself where he could see out the window. Ellie loaded the pistol, her hand steady despite the fear coiling in her stomach. "How many? Can't tell. They're staying back, using the trees." He glanced at her. "If something happens, nothing's going to happen." She moved to the opposite window, giving them coverage on both sides. "We've faced worse odds." A voice called from outside, rough and mocking. "Hello, the cabin. We're looking for 3 friends of ours. Seen 'em pass this way." Calder didn't answer. "Come now, friend. We know you're in there. Smoke from your chimney gives you away." A pause. "We also know you've got a woman with you. Pretty thing, from what Scarface said before he disappeared." Ellie's jaw tightened. These men thought they held all the cards, but they didn't know who they were dealing with. "Here's how this is gonna go," the voice continued. "You send out the woman. We'll let you live. Simple as that. Here's a counteroffer. Calder called back. You turn around and ride out. I won't kill you all. Harsh laughter echoed through the trees. Big talk for one man. I'm not just one man, Calder said quietly. For Ellie's benefit. I'm a man with everything to lose. That makes me dangerous. The attack came suddenly. Windows shattered as bullets tore through the oiled paper. Ellie dropped low, glass showering over her. She heard Calder's rifle bark once, twice, followed by a scream from outside. One down, he said calmly. Already reloading. They came from 3 sides at once. Ellie fired through the broken window, saw a man stumble and fall. Another appeared at the door, trying to break it down with an axe. Calder's shot took him in the chest, sending him tumbling backward. But there were too many, and they were too determined. A man burst through the window near Ellie, tackling her before she could bring the pistol around. They went down hard, rolling across the floor. He was bigger, stronger, his hands reaching for her throat. She brought her knee up hard, making him grunt and loosen his grip. The pistol had fallen somewhere, but her hand found a piece of broken glass. She slashed at his face, drawing blood and curses. Calder was there suddenly, hauling the man off her and throwing him bodily through the window he'd entered. But the distraction cost him. Another attacker struck him with a rifle butt, sending him to his knees. Calder! Ellie scrambled for the fallen pistol as 2 more men crowded through the door. Everything became chaos. She fired at one man, missed, fired again and saw him clutch his shoulder. Calder was grappling with another, both men straining for control of a knife. A third man grabbed Ellie from behind, lifting her off her feet. Got her! He shouted triumphantly. She went limp for a moment, making him adjust his grip, then threw her head back hard. His nose crunched satisfyingly. As he staggered, she twisted free, grabbed the coffee pot from the hearth, and swung it with all her strength. He went down in a spray of hot coffee and embers. The man Calder was fighting had him pinned, the knife inching toward his throat. Without thinking, Ellie snatched up Calder's rifle and brought the butt down on the attacker's skull. He collapsed like a felled tree. Sudden silence. They stood panting, surrounded by dead and unconscious men. Blood ran from a cut on Calder's forehead. Ellie's dress was torn, her hands bleeding from the glass. Is that all of them? She gasped. Before Calder could answer, cold metal pressed against the back of her neck. Drop the rifle. Woman. She froze. Behind her, a man she hadn't seen chuckled darkly. Should have taken our offer. Now you both die. Let her go, Calder said, his voice deadly quiet. Your quarrel's with me. Oh, I don't think so. See, she killed friends of mine. That makes it personal. The gun pressed harder. Say goodbye to your woman. Breed. Time slowed. Ellie saw Calder's hand move, almost too fast to follow. The knife that had nearly killed him flew through the air. She heard a wet thunk, felt the pressure of the gun disappear. The man behind her made a strange gurgling sound and fell. She turned to see him clutching the knife buried in his throat, eyes already glazing. Then Calder was there, pulling her against him, his hands running over her, checking for injuries. Are you hurt, Ellie? Talk to me. I'm fine. She was shaking now, reaction setting in. I'm fine. He held her tight, murmuring soothing words as the adrenaline faded. Around them, the cabin looked like a battlefield. Windows broken, furniture overturned, blood on the floor. But they were alive. We need to go, Calder said finally. There might be more. They worked quickly, gathering what they could carry. Food, weapons, blankets. The few precious items that mattered. Ellie insisted on taking Ayoka's things, packing them carefully despite their haste. As they prepared the horses taken from the first group of attackers, the storm Calder had predicted finally arrived. Snow began falling heavily, quickly covering the signs of battle. Where will we go? Ellie asked as they mounted up. There's a place, Calder said. Another cabin, deeper in the mountains. Built it as a backup years ago. It's rough, but it'll do until we figure out our next move. They rode into the storm, leaving the only home Calder had known for 12 years. Ellie looked back once, seeing the cabin already disappearing behind the curtain of snow. It felt like another life ending, another beginning uncertain. The journey was hard. The storm grew worse, turning the world into a white void. They had to dismount and lead the horses through the deepest drifts. More than once, Ellie thought they were lost, but Calder never hesitated, following some internal compass she couldn't understand. Night was falling when they finally reached a narrow valley hidden between towering peaks. The backup cabin was little more than a glorified lean-to, but it was shelter. They saw to the horses first, then stumbled inside, nearly frozen. "I'm sorry," Calder said as they huddled together for warmth. "This isn't what I wanted for you." "Stop." She pressed her fingers to his lips. "We're alive. We're together. Nothing else matters." He built a small fire, careful not to make too much smoke. They ate cold biscuits and dried meat, too exhausted to cook. As the storm raged outside, they held each other, not speaking of what they'd lost or what tomorrow might bring. "You were incredible today," Calder said finally. "The way you fought, I've seen trained soldiers who couldn't have done better. I had something worth fighting for." She touched his face where blood had dried from the cut. "So did you. When I saw him with that gun to your head," his arms tightened around her, "I thought I was going to lose you. Just like, but you didn't." She kissed him softly. "You saved me. We saved each other." They made a bed of pine boughs and blankets, creating a warm nest against the cold. As they lay together, Ellie thought about the strange turns life could take. A month ago, she'd been a grieving widow on a wagon train, heading for a sister-in-law she barely knew. Now she was hiding in a mountain shelter with a man who'd gone native, wearing an Apache woman's necklace, her hands stained with the blood of men she'd killed without remorse. "What are you thinking?" Calder asked, sensing her mood. "How much I've changed. Thomas wouldn't recognize me now." "Do you regret it?" She considered carefully. "No, I regret the violence, the death, but not the changes. I feel more myself than I ever have." Does that make sense? Perfect sense. He pressed a kiss to her hair. Ayoka used to say crisis strips away pretense, shows us who we really are underneath. Who am I underneath? A warrior, he said without hesitation. Strong, brave, fierce when protecting what's yours. The kind of woman who can survive anything. And you? Who are you underneath? He was quiet for a moment. A man who's been given a second chance he probably doesn't deserve, but one I'm going to take with both hands. The storm howled outside their small shelter, but inside was warmth and love and the determination to survive. Tomorrow they would have to move again, find somewhere safer. There would be decisions to make about their future, challenges to face. But tonight, they had each other. In a world that had shown them its cruelest face, they'd found something worth fighting for, as sleep finally claimed them. Ellie's last thought was of Ayoka, hoping the Apache woman would approve of how fiercely they'd fought to protect their love. The beaded necklace lay warm against her throat, a blessing from the past on an uncertain future. The fever came 3 days later. Calder had been hiding it, Ellie realized, watching him struggle to rise from their makeshift bed. His skin burned under her touch, and when he tried to speak, only a hoarse whisper emerged. "Just need rest," he managed, but his eyes were glassy, unfocused. Fear clenched her stomach. The cut on his forehead had seemed minor, but now she saw the angry red streaks spreading from it. Infection. Without proper medicine. Without a doctor. "Don't you dare," she said fiercely, pressing cool cloth to his burning skin. "Don't you dare leave me now." She'd nursed Thomas through his final illness, watched helplessly as fever consumed him. But that was in town, with a doctor's help and proper medicines. Here, in this rough shelter with winter still raging outside, she had only her determination and what little supplies they'd brought. Calder drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes lucid, sometimes lost in delirium. He spoke to people who weren't there, army commanders, Apache elders, and always Ayoka. I'm sorry, he mumbled, reaching for invisible hands. Should have saved you. Should have died trying. Shh, Ellie soothed, though tears ran down her face. It's all right. Rest now. She melted snow for water, forced him to drink when he was conscious enough, tore strips from her petticoat for bandages, found herbs Calder had packed, things she recognized from watching him prepare remedies, and made a poultice that might help draw out the poison. On the second night, his fever spiked dangerously. He thrashed in the blankets, fighting invisible enemies. When Ellie tried to hold him still, he looked at her without recognition. Ayoka. His hand touched her face wonderingly. You came back. The words cut deep, but Ellie pushed aside her hurt. Yes, she whispered. I'm here. He pulled her close, murmuring in Apache. She held him, stroking his hair, playing the role he needed. If it gave him comfort, she would be anyone he wanted. Forgive me, he said in English, tears leaking from his closed eyes. Couldn't protect you, couldn't protect our child. Ellie's breath caught. A child. Ayoka had been pregnant when she died. This final tragedy explained so much, the depth of his guilt, the weight of his grief. There's nothing to forgive, she whispered. You loved me. That was enough. He calmed at her words, sinking into deeper sleep. Ellie held him through the long night, praying to any god who might listen. The storm had finally passed, leaving crystalline silence. Through the shelter's small opening, stars glittered like ice chips against black velvet. Near dawn, the fever broke. Calder's breathing eased, his skin cooling under her touch. When his eyes opened, they were clear, seeing her truly. Ellie, his voice was raw but present. You're here. Where else would I be? She tried for lightness, though exhaustion weighed her down. Someone has to keep you from wandering off into the snow. He caught her hand, seeing the toll the past days had taken. Her face was drawn, eyes shadowed with fatigue. How long? 3 days. You had me worried. She couldn't keep the tremor from her voice. Thought I might lose you, take more than a fever to kill me. But his attempt at bravado fell flat. I said things in the delirium. I remember some of it. You called me Ayoka. He closed his eyes. I'm sorry. That must have hurt. She was pregnant. It wasn't a question. A long silence. Then, 3 months, near as she could figure. She was so happy, said the spirits had blessed us twice, first with love, then with new life. His voice broke. I failed them both. Ellie stretched out beside him, careful of his weakness. You didn't fail anyone. Evil men did evil things. The guilt belongs to them. Not you. I should have been there. Then you'd be dead too, and I'd have frozen in that blizzard. She touched his face gently. Everything happens for a reason. Calder, maybe not one we can see, but a reason nonetheless. He studied her face. When did you get so wise? Somewhere between fighting off bandits and nursing a stubborn man through fever. She managed a small smile. I've had an eventful month. He pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her hair. I love you, Eleanor Carter, not as an echo or replacement, but as you, fierce, strong, impossible you. I love you too. She pressed her face against his chest, finally allowing exhaustion to claim her. Now sleep, real sleep. I'll be here when you wake. They slept through the day, wrapped around each other like survivors of a shipwreck. When evening came, Calder was strong enough to sit up, to eat the simple soup Ellie made from their dwindling supplies. We can't stay here much longer, he said, gesturing at their meager stores. Food's running low, and this shelter won't hold against another big storm. Where can we go? Back to the cabin? Too dangerous. They'll have found the bodies by now. Maybe sent word to Fort Benton. He considered their options. There's a trading post 2 days north, run by a French-Canadian named Dubois. He won't ask questions if we've got money to spend. They had money, taken from the men who'd attacked them. Blood money, but it would keep them alive. After that, we disappear, Head into Canada, maybe, or deeper into the mountains. Find somewhere new to build. He took her hand. If you're still willing to follow a broken-down scout with more past than future, I'd follow you anywhere. She squeezed his fingers. But first, you need to get your strength back. No more heroics for a few days. They spent those days in quiet recovery. Calder taught her more about survival, how to read weather signs, find food in winter, make medicines from plants. Ellie shared stories of her childhood in Ohio, her marriage to Thomas, dreams she'd had before life got in the way. I wanted to be a teacher once. She admitted, thought I could shape young minds, make a difference. Thomas said it wasn't proper for a married woman. You'd have been a good teacher. Calder smiled. Though I think you've found a different kind of classroom out here. On their last night in the shelter, Calder did something unexpected. He took out his knife and began carving into a flat piece of wood he'd been working on. When he finished, he showed her, Calder Briggs and Eleanor Carter, married in the sight of God and mountains, 1874. But we're not, we are in every way that matters. He set the wood aside, took her hands. I know it's not legal, not proper, but out here, with just us and the sky as witnesses, I take you as my wife, if you'll have me. Ellie's throat tightened. I will. I do. He reached for the leather pouch at his throat, a Yoka's medicine bundle, and slowly removed it. For a long moment, he held it, then placed it carefully with the other Apache items they'd packed. Time to let go, he said softly. She'll always be part of who I am, but I can't live in the past anymore. He looked at Ellie. Not when I have a future worth fighting for. They made their own ceremony there in the shelter. Simple vows spoken by firelight. Promises to protect, to cherish, to face whatever came together. Calder fashioned rings from strips of leather, blessed them with words he remembered from long ago Sundays. When they kissed, it felt like a new beginning. They made love slowly, carefully, mindful of his recent weakness but needing the connection. Every touch was a promise, every whispered word a vow. When Ellie cried out his name, it echoed off the mountain walls like a prayer. Afterward, they lay watching the fire die to embers. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, the journey to the trading post, the uncertainty of what came next. But tonight, they were husband and wife in truth, if not in law. No regrets, Calder asked, echoing her question from days before. Only one. She traced patterns on his chest. I wish we'd met differently. In a world where we could have courted properly, where your first love didn't have to die for us to find each other. In that world, I'd have been a different man. Probably wouldn't have deserved you. He kissed her forehead. We are who we are because of what we've survived. That brought us together. The preacher back home would say God works in mysterious ways. Maybe he does. Calder pulled her closer. All I know is I'm grateful. For this. For you. For the chance to start over. They talked until dawn, making plans. The trading post first. Then perhaps the mining camps to the west where newcomers could disappear easily. They'd need new names, a new story. Brother and sister, maybe, or cousins traveling together. I'll miss these mountains, Ellie said, looking out at the peaks glowing pink with sunrise. We'll find new mountains, build a new home. He smiled. Maybe even have those children Ayoka dreamed of. The mention of children sent a flutter through Ellie's stomach. You'd want that. After, I want everything with you, a home, a family, years of ordinary days. His voice roughened. Want to see you around with our child. Want to teach our sons to hunt and our daughters to be as fierce as their mother. Daughters who can shoot and sons who can cook. Why not? World's changing. Might as well raise children ready for it. They packed their few belongings as the sun climbed higher. The wooden marriage marker Calder wrapped carefully and tucked in his saddlebags. Ayoka's possessions were distributed between them. The beaded items with Ellie, the weapons and tools with Calder, not discarded but transformed, becoming part of their shared story. As they prepared to leave, Ellie took one last look at the shelter that had protected them. "Thank you," she whispered to the rough walls, the cold mountains, the spirit of the woman who'd first taught Calder to survive here. Calder appeared beside her, leading the horses. "Ready?" She took the reins he offered, swung up into the saddle with growing confidence. "Ready." They rode out of the valley together, toward whatever future awaited. Behind them, smoke from their last fire dissipated into clear mountain air. Ahead, the trail wound through pristine snow, unmarked and full of possibility. The past would always travel with them. Thomas's gentle spirit, Ayoka's fierce love, the violence that had driven them together. But it no longer defined them. They were writing a new story now, one storm and one sunrise at a time. As they crested the ridge, Calder reached over to take her hand. No words were needed. The touch said everything. Love, promise, partnership. Together, they descended toward the unknown, carrying their ghosts lightly and their hope like a flame against the cold. The journey down from the mountains took 3 days of careful travel. The snow was melting fast now, turning trails into muddy streams and making the horses work for every step. They reached the small settlement of Cedar Falls just as the spring sun was setting behind the peaks, painting the sky in shades of copper and gold. Cedar Falls wasn't much. A main street of rough buildings, a general store, a blacksmith, and a church with a crooked steeple. But after weeks in the wilderness, it looked like civilization itself. People stared as they rode in, taking in Calder's wild appearance and Ellie wearing men's clothes for practicality. "Keep your head up." Calder murmured, "We belong here as much as anyone." They took a room at the town's only boarding house, registering as Mr. and Mrs. James Walker, the proprietress, a stern woman named Mrs. Henley, looked them over with sharp eyes, but said nothing when Calder paid in advance with good money. That first night in a real bed felt strange after so long on pine boughs and hard ground. Ellie lay awake listening to the sounds of town life, dogs barking, a piano playing somewhere, voices raised in laughter or argument. It was both comforting and unsettling. "Can't sleep?" Calder asked, pulling her close. "It's so loud. I got used to the quiet. We don't have to stay long. Just need supplies and—" He paused. "I want to do right by you. Find a preacher. Make it legal." The next morning brought whispers and stares as they ventured out. Ellie had cleaned and mended her dress as best she could, but she still looked like what she was, a woman who'd survived the frontier. Some faces showed curiosity, others suspicion. At the general store, the clerk's wife tried to make conversation. "You folks passing through?" "Looking to settle," Ellie replied, selecting flour and coffee. "My husband knows these mountains well." "Indian fighter, is he?" The woman's eyes lingered on Calder's long hair, the moccasins he still wore. "Scout," Calder said shortly. "Retired." The conversation died, but Ellie felt the weight of judgment. This was what Calder had warned her about, the narrow minds, the quick condemnation of anything different. They were leaving the store when trouble found them. 3 men blocked their path, ranch hands by the look of them, drunk despite the early hour. "Well, well," the largest said, spitting tobacco juice near Calder's feet. "Heard we had us an Indian lover in town. Thought those were just stories." Calder's hand moved subtly toward his knife. "We don't want trouble. Maybe trouble wants you." The man's eyes shifted to Ellie, taking in the Apache necklace visible at her throat. "That's a pretty piece. Where'd you get it, Missy?" "Off some dead squaw." The rage that flashed through Ellie surprised her with its intensity. Before Calder could react, she stepped forward. "It was a gift from someone who understood honor and courage, qualities you clearly lack." The man's face reddened. He reached for her, but Calder's hand shot out, gripping the man's wrist with crushing force. "Touch her, and I'll kill you where you stand," Calder said quietly. The other 2 men backed away, suddenly remembering urgent business elsewhere. But their leader was too drunk or too stupid to recognize danger. "Big talk from a traitor. You're the one they talk about, ain't you?" "Briggs," Went native. Married one of them savages. He leered at Ellie. Guess you like them wild, don't you, woman? What happened next was too fast for most to follow. Calder's fist connected with the man's jaw, dropping him like a stone. When one of his friends made a move, Ellie had the pistol out and aimed before he could clear leather. I'd think twice, she said calmly. The crowd that had gathered murmured uneasily. Some faces showed approval. The drunk was known for causing problems. But others looked hostile, seeing their prejudices confirmed. That's enough. A new voice cut through the tension. A man wearing a marshal's star pushed through the crowd. He was older, weathered, with intelligent eyes that missed nothing. Jake, get up and sleep it off. The rest of you, move along. As the crowd dispersed, the marshal turned to Calder and Ellie. You're Briggs. Heard about you. Calder tensed. We're not looking for trouble. Marshal, name's Tom Morrison, and I believe you. The marshal studied them both. My brother served at Fort Benton. Told me about a scout who chose love over duty. Always wondered what became of him. Nothing good, Calder said flatly. I can see that. Morrison's eyes softened. Look, this town's got its share of fools, but most folks are decent. You planning to stay? Just passing through. Ellie said, We need supplies and... She glanced at Calder. We're looking for a preacher. Morrison's eyebrows rose. Getting married? Well, that's different. He smiled. Reverend Mills is a good man. Lost his own wife to cholera. Understands about second chances. You'll find him at the church. And if anyone gives you more trouble, you come find me. They spent the rest of the day gathering what they needed for their new life. Ellie was surprised when several townswomen approached her, offering quiet support. Mrs. Henley from the boarding house pressed a wrapped package into her hands. A new dress. Simple but clean. For your wedding, the older woman said gruffly. Everyone deserves a fresh start. That evening, in the small church with its crooked steeple, Reverend Mills performed the ceremony. He was a gentleman with kind eyes who asked no questions about their past. Mrs. Henley and Marshal Morrison stood as witnesses. Do you, Calder Briggs, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? The Reverend's voice filled the empty church. I do. Calder's voice was strong. Certain. Do you, Eleanor Carter, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? I do. Ellie squeezed Calder's hands. Feeling the circle close at last, the Reverend pronounced them man and wife. When Calder kissed her, it felt like coming home. Afterward, Morrison invited them to dinner at his home. His wife, Sarah, was a warm woman who immediately put Ellie at ease. Over the meal, they learned that Morrison had his own complicated history with the Indian Wars, lost friends on both sides. He said quietly, finally realized there weren't any winners in that fight, just different ways of losing. He looked at Calder. You did what you thought was right. Can't fault a man for that. As they prepared to leave the next morning, Sarah Morrison pressed a letter into Ellie's hands. My sister runs a trading post up near the Canadian border. Good people, don't ask questions. Might be the fresh start you're looking for. The town turned out to see them go, some to bid farewell, others to ensure they truly left. Ellie rode with her head high. The new wedding ring Calder had bought glinting on her finger alongside the leather band from their mountain ceremony. They were a day out of Cedar Falls when Calder suddenly reined in his horse. Look back, he said softly. Ellie turned in her saddle. The town was long gone, hidden by hills and distance, but in the morning light, she could see their trail winding back toward the mountains where their story began. Any regrets? Calder asked. None. She reached over to take his hand. We faced their judgment and survived. Together. They rode on, following the Morrison woman's directions north. The landscape changed gradually. Mountains giving way to rolling hills, forests opening into meadows dotted with wildflowers. Spring was fully upon the land, bringing new life everywhere. On the 5th day, they created a rise and saw it. A trading post beside a clear river, smoke rising peacefully from its chimney. As they approached, a woman emerged, shading her eyes against the sun. She looked at the letter Ellie carried, then at their faces, and smiled. "You must be the Briggs. Sarah wrote you were coming. Welcome to River's Bend." They spent that night in a real bed, in a room of their own, legally married and ready to begin again. As Ellie lay in Calder's arms, she thought about the journey that had brought them here, the wagon train attack, the blizzard, the violent men, the fever that nearly took him. "What are you thinking?" Calder asked, stroking her hair. "About Ayoka, about Thomas, about how loss led us to each other." She touched the beaded necklace, which she still wore. "I think they'd be happy for us. I dream about them sometimes," Calder admitted. "But now they're smiling, at peace. Maybe that's their wedding gift to us. Peace at last." They made love slowly, savoring the safety of walls and roof, the promise of tomorrow. Outside, the river sang its ancient song, carrying winter's snowmelt toward the sea. Inside, two hearts beat as one, no longer haunted by the past but facing the future together. The next morning, Ellie stood by the river, watching the sun rise over a new landscape. Calder joined her, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "Ready to build that life we talked about?" he asked. "More than ready." She leaned back against him, feeling his solid warmth. "We've earned our happiness, Calder Briggs. Now let's live it." As they walked back to the trading post, hand in hand, Ellie noticed she no longer looked back. The mountains of their meeting, the ghosts of their losses, the violence that had driven them together, all had become part of their story, but no longer defined it. They were simply Calder and Ellie Briggs now, starting fresh in a place that asked no questions and offered no judgments. The Apache necklace caught the morning light as Ellie moved, but it was no longer a memorial to the past. It had become a bridge between what was and what would be, a reminder that love could bloom even in the harshest ground, that two broken hearts could heal each other, that sometimes the greatest gift comes wrapped in loss. Their story had begun in blood and snow, but it would continue in sunshine and hope. And that, Ellie thought as she squeezed her husband's hand, was the true miracle of the frontier, not the taming of wild land, but the healing of wild hearts. Thank you all for listening to this tale from the Wild West. I'm curious to know where in the world you're enjoying these stories. Please share your location in the comments below so we can connect across the miles. Don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Campfire for more stories of love, loss, and redemption from America's frontier. Share your thoughts about Ellie and Calder's journey in the comments. Until our next story around the campfire, partners.